From today on, you'll be the one taking care of Mom. Caden's wife, Bonnie, said to their younger brother Danny, forcefully pushing the wheelchair I was sitting in towards him. Wait a minute. I can't just suddenly take on that responsibility. Give me a little more time. Before Danny could finish, Caden and Bonnie got into their car and drove away. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Caden had always been somewhat indifferent. But to think that he would abandon his own mother, me. Danny's wife, Cindy, poked her head out from the room on the left side of the entrance, laughing. Caden and Bonnie really don't get it, do they? Cindy's remark made me laugh too. She was absolutely right. I'm glad we prepared for this in advance. Caden and Bonnie will soon regret what they've done. I never imagined I'd end up in a wheelchair. A few years ago, I, Agnes, had an accident on my way home from work and lost the ability to move my lower body. Since then, I've had to live life in a wheelchair. Being forced into this new lifestyle at nearly 60 was challenging at first. I was already divorced from my gambling addict husband, and both of my children had married and moved out. I didn't always have someone to rely on, which only added to my despair. During this time, my younger son Danny and his wife Cindy were there for me. Mom, are you okay? If there's anything we can do, just let us know. They would come over during breaks from their work, Danny and Cindy would say, taking care of the house. Danny, who had just started his own business and was incredibly busy, was nevertheless dedicated in looking after me. When Danny and Cindy couldn't come, they arranged for a home caregiver to ensure I was never in need. Helping a family in trouble is just what you do. That's right, Agnes. Especially in times like these, we need to help each other. We're family, after all. Whenever I felt guilty, Danny and Cindy would always respond that way. I always knew Danny was a kind soul, but his kindness became even more apparent in this situation. In contrast, there was my older son, Caden. If you're okay, then I don't need to come, right? I'm pretty busy now. When I told Caden about my new life in a wheelchair, he seemed concerned at first. But as soon as I said I was fine, he ended the call quickly. And since then, he hadn't contacted me at all. He had always been indifferent, lacking a sense of conscience. He always had plenty to say to me, and we often used to argue. I still remember how he treated me when I caught a cold and couldn't cook a meal. Mom, you always sacrifice yourself for your kids, right? Being born to a parent like you, I guess I'm just unlucky. Caden said coldly, looking down at me as I lay feverish. I can't forget the coldness in his eyes. Similar incidents had occurred several times since then. It was not surprising given Caden's nature, but it was still a shock. However, surprisingly, Caden recently started visiting home. Mom, how are you feeling? He and Bonnie would ask when they came to visit, which really took me aback. Lately, Danny and his wife had become busier as their business took off and couldn't visit as often. Seemingly aware of this, Caden and Bonnie started to come by more frequently. They helped around the house just like Danny and his wife did. It's tough for you, alone. We'll try to drop by more often, Caden said with a refreshing smile, making me wonder if he was really the same person. From then on, Caden and Bonnie indeed came every weekend. They were both kind and considerate, as if everything in the past had been a lie. At first, I was shocked by how much Caden had changed and wondered why, but gradually, I started to feel that meeting Bonnie had been good for him. The way Caden looked at Bonnie was filled with kindness. Maybe something in Caden's heart had changed during the time he spent with her. I was grateful to Bonnie for changing Caden. Mom, it's been a while. I finally managed to come. That's what Danny said when he visited after half a year. That day, Caden and Bonnie were also at the house. Although I was delighted to have the family together, the expressions on Caden and Bonnie's faces were stern. You hardly cared about Mom until now, yet you show up like this. Caden snapped as soon as he saw Danny. I wanted to come, but I've been busy with work. I'm sorry. Are you saying we're just sitting around? Even though we're busy, we make time to come here. How can you say something like that? Danny looked downcast and muttered, I'm sorry. Danny and Cindy were really supportive after the accident. My gratitude doesn't change just because they couldn't come for a while. Moreover, I question whether Caden, who didn't visit at the time of the accident, has the right to blame Danny. Caden's rant didn't stop even as Danny apologized. If you were worried about Mom, you'd make time to come, no matter how busy. Showing up now. You're not here for the insurance money, are you? Enough! I shouted. I couldn't bear Caden's baseless accusations. My outburst silenced Caden. But of course, the atmosphere turned sour. Danny and his wife helped with the household chores as usual, but they seemed uncomfortable throughout. It must have been very awkward for them. Despite coming all the way here, Danny and his family left in a hurry. The long-awaited reunion ended in disappointment. I can't believe they came all this way just to leave. I muttered, causing Caden to look angry. They're strange, showing up out of the blue like that. That's not true. Before you and Bonnie started coming, Danny took great care of me. I retorted, and Caden just scoffed. Maybe that's their strategy? I asked what he meant, but Caden didn't answer. Instead, Bonnie spoke up. Caden is just worried. Even if it's not about the insurance, it's strange that Danny and Cindy would suddenly start coming around. Maybe they're planning something? Bonnie seemed to agree with Caden, who nodded. Maybe their company isn't doing so well. So, they're trying to cozy up to you, hoping for some financial help. Stop it! I couldn't bear to listen any longer. Raising my voice made Caden and Bonnie quiet down. Thank you for helping, but I think it's best if you leave for today. I practically forced Caden and his wife out. Why did it have to come to this? I was so sad I felt like crying. A few days later, I received a phone call. It was Cindy. Agnes, I need to talk to you. You might not believe this, but... Cindy started speaking seriously. Her voice more severe than I'd ever heard, stirring up anxiety. Actually, the last time we were over, I overheard Caden and Bonnie saying, soon this house will be ours. It seems like they're planning to drive you out. I was so shocked, I couldn't think straight. Cindy apparently heard Caden and Bonnie talking. Just a little more convincing, and we can get Mom out. Then this house will be ours. Old folks will believe anything if you're convincing enough, it's easy. They were laughing about it, according to Cindy. I can't believe it. I didn't doubt Cindy, but it was hard to believe. That Caden would deceive me for the sake of the house. I understand how you feel. But please, look at this. The screen of her phone lit up. It seemed Cindy had sent me a video. While on the phone, I watched the video. There were Caden and Bonnie, saying what Cindy had just told me. I nearly collapsed from shock. Caden's change of heart was just a ruse to deceive me. If he could get me out, the house would be his. He had been kind to me, trying to gain my trust for that purpose. I had almost fallen for their scheme. While I was silent, Cindy spoke up again. So I have a suggestion. What if we demolish the house? If you don't want to hand it over to Caden and Bonnie, demolishing it might be an option. Danny's voice faintly reached me from the background. It seemed like Cindy had put the phone on speaker, and now Danny's voice came through more clearly. "Sorry for bringing this up so suddenly," he said, then started to speak. "The house is old, isn't it? I've always wondered what your plans were to do with it. If you're not thinking of passing it on to Caden or me, maybe it's a good idea to just clear the land?" The sudden proposal left me feeling quite bewildered. I hadn't given much thought to what to do with the house. I assumed the children would decide. That's what I had in mind. So being asked to make a decision so suddenly left me puzzled. It's a big decision, so take your time. But please be careful around Caden and Bonnie. You never know what they're planning. With those parting words, Danny hung up. For about a week, I pondered deeply. This house was bought with hard work by both of us before my husband got hooked on gambling. It's filled with both good and bad memories. What's the best thing to do? While caressing the pillar where Caden and Danny's heights were marked, I kept thinking. Even during that week, Caden and Bonnie kept visiting. Danny and Cindy have been coming around a lot lately. Wonder what they're up to. Maybe they're after your money. You shouldn't give in to them. Bonnie's smile stirred anger within me. It's you two who are trying to take from me, isn't it? I endured and tried to behave normally. Knowing Caden and Bonnie's true intentions made their kindness feel deceitful. Rather than letting Caden and Bonnie have their way with the house, I might as well. I made up my mind, picked up my mobile phone, and made a call. After a while, Caden and his group came to the house again. As soon as they entered, Caden started calling Danny. "Danny, I have something important to discuss. Can I come over to your place?" Caden spoke briefly with Danny and then hung up. "We'd like to have an important discussion with Danny and his family. It involves you, Agnes, so we'd like you to join us." With those words, Bonnie smiled. I obediently got into the car, as told. It took about 3 hours to drive to Danny's house. Danny and Cindy had been commuting this distance for us. Thinking about it made me feel grateful yet somewhat guilty, a strange mix of emotions. Upon reaching Danny's house, without waiting for Bonnie and me to get out of the car, Caden briskly walked towards the entrance. As soon as Danny appeared, Caden said, "From today on, you'll be the one taking care of Mom." Bonnie pushed the wheelchair I was sitting in towards Danny, as if thrusting me at him. "Just wait a minute. You can't just spring this on me. We need to talk more." Danny was cut off mid-sentence as Bonnie began to speak. "This is assisted living, isn't it? It was so difficult to get here with the house being near the mountains. We've done our part in taking care of Agnes. Now it's your turn." With a dismissive smile, Bonnie said this and then she and Caden got into their car and left. It all happened so fast. Left behind, I was welcomed into Danny's home. "I can't believe they actually left you," Danny murmured with disappointment. Footsteps echoed as Cindy came out of a room on the left side of the entrance. Laughing. "Caden and Bonnie really don't get it, do they?" Cindy laughed so much that I ended up laughing too. I wondered how they would react when they realized things didn't go as they planned. Just imagining it made me laugh even more. Danny, who had believed in Caden until the end, watched us with a complex expression. "Mom! What's going on?" It was about 5 days after I was kicked out of the house that I got a call from Caden. "What's wrong? What's going on?" I tried to sound as calm as possible. Caden seemed irritated. "What do you mean, what's going on, damn it?" he muttered. "Just now, some company showed up at the house saying they're starting demolition work and kicked us out." The company Caden was talking about must have been the one I had arranged. Following Danny's suggestion, I had decided to demolish the house. I had managed to complete the procedures before Caden and his wife could take over, feeling relieved, but then they showed up. What's going on? We were planning to live in that house. We even gave up our apartment. What are you going to do about it? It turned out that Caden and Bonnie, after kicking me out, had moved their belongings into the house and started living there. But today, they were relaxing at home when the company arrived and were unceremoniously kicked out. I have no idea about that. I just decided what to do with the house and chose to demolish it. Caden, infuriated by my calm response, started yelling over the phone. Don't mess around! That house is mine too! Don't do whatever you want! Who's the one being unreasonable? Kicking me out of the house and trying to make it your own. That house was bought with hard work by me and Dad. I'll do what I want with it. I shouted this into the mobile phone and then hung up. After that, Caden kept calling and emailing me. I was taking care of you. The least you could do is give me the house. When I received that email, I felt unbearable anger. I appreciate the help you gave. But that's separate from the house. I don't want to see the face of someone trying to deceive their parent. I don't want to see your wife's face either. Goodbye. That was my reply. Before Caden could contact me again, I set my phone to block his calls. Unable to reach me, Caden apparently visited Danny's house several times, but no one was there anymore. We had already moved. Lost and without options, Caden eventually left. When I told Danny about my decision to demolish the house, he made another suggestion. Cindy and I were talking, and we were wondering, Mom, would you like to work at my company? I was taken aback by Danny's sudden offer. That's a generous offer, but are you sure? Our company's administrative department just had a vacancy. It was unexpected, and we haven't even posted a job listing yet. You've always worked as an administrative officer, Mom, so it seemed like a perfect fit. Danny added that, of course, it was only if I felt comfortable with it. I gladly accepted. If I was leaving this home, I needed to find a new job anyway. But at my age, and in a wheelchair, finding work wasn't going to be easy. Danny's proposal was a blessing. And if you're as okay with it, how about moving in together? Cindy continued speaking, oblivious to my astonishment. I've always known we'd live with you one day. That's what Danny told me before we got married, so I was prepared to move in together. I was surprised to learn this new information. I had no idea Danny and Cindy cared for me so deeply. Moved by their kindness, I felt tears welling up. Thank you. I whispered, my voice breaking. You've always worked hard for the family, Mom. Seeing how hard you worked, I always vowed to repay you someday. So please, don't ever think you're a burden to us. Danny said, a bit embarrassed. His unchanged kindness since he was a child made me feel that all the struggles were worth it. After moving to Danny's house, we soon relocated to a new home. Danny's current place was rented, but he had recently built a new house. I wanted to surprise you, so I kept it a secret, Danny said with a smile. I was constantly amazed by Danny and his family. Mom, you don't have to go to work, so please take care of the house. With a gesture of apology, Danny hurried out. Apparently, they had just received a large order. Even though it was a weekend, Danny had to go to work. Cindy, my grandchild in my arms, and I waved goodbye as Danny rushed off. It's been a little over a year since that incident. In that time, Danny and Cindy had a beautiful child, and Cindy is now focused on parenting. The baby's big eyes are just like Cindy's, and the mouth is a spitting image of Danny. The baby has the best features of both, a truly adorable face. Raising a child now is different from when I did it, everything is more convenient, and with 3 adults around. It's easier to give the child undivided attention, creating a loving and peaceful home. I look forward to watching my grandchild grow, and I'm enjoying my current job. I can't afford to tire out yet. Holding my grandchild, that's what I thought to myself. Hey, Mom, what's up with dinner? Finished cleaning yet? You better hurry up or Morgan will be back home. Kyle and Allison addressed me for the first time in months. In the cluttered living room, there I was, feeling under the weather. Something in me just snapped. Kyle and Allison, looking at my silence, laughed mockingly. I doubt I could ever forgive them, even if they apologized. To ensure they thoroughly reflected on their behavior, I decided to give them a taste of their own medicine, and then some. My name is Michelle, I'm 53. A housewife. I married Morgan, who is 5 years my senior, when I was 24. We had a daughter and a son. Our daughter Olivia is now 27. She married a guy she had been dating since high school and is now busy raising her kids. Our son Kyle is 25 and is set to get married next month. Both our children are starting their own happy lives, and I finally felt a sense of relief, like my parenting duties were truly winding down. But there's a bit of unease. It's about Kyle's fiancée, Allison. Allison and Kyle started dating about a year ago. But right after they began dating, Allison practically moved in with us. There was no formal introduction when we first met. Before I knew it, she was staying in Kyle's room, and naturally joined Kyle at the dining table, eating the meals I prepared. At first, thinking we might get along, I struck up a conversation with Allison during one of our meals. Allison, when do you have a day off? How about we cook together next time? At that point, I somehow sensed that Kyle would end up marrying Allison, so I asked. I thought building a comfortable relationship where she didn't feel obligated around us was best. But my concern seemed nothing but a nuisance to Allison. A day off to do chores? Me? Allison responded grumpily and fell silent. Mom, Allison isn't my wife yet. It's insane to make her do chores. Kyle also got angry and blamed me. I didn't mean it like that. I just thought it'd be nice to do something together. I'm sorry. Everyone wants to relax on their days off, right? I hastily apologized and chuckled, but Allison's sullen expression never cleared. But with the wedding set, Allison was becoming part of our family. It seemed there were disagreements between the two during wedding preparations, as I could hear them arguing from Kyle's room, but somehow, they were making progress. Despite my expectations of them moving out after getting married, it seemed they intended to continue living with us, so not much would change. The wedding went off without any major issues. However, I learned then that Allison had quit her job. I thought it would have been nice to know that beforehand, as I kept smiling throughout the wedding. But on the flip side, maybe this meant she'd start pitching in with the household chores. After things settled post-wedding, I approached her about the household duties. Allison, I'd like you to start helping with the chores, just with what you can handle for now. It's also so you can quickly learn where everything is. It's for your own convenience too. But Allison didn't seem to change after the marriage. She just wore the same displeased expression in response to my words. Mom, you're rushing things. We're still newlyweds. Newlyweds, sure, but you've been living in this house for a year now. I'm not asking you to do everything all at once. You've quit your job, so I'd think you'd have some time for chores. Allison's sullen face and Kyle's reproachful words irked me, and I responded a bit sharply. Kyle is working too. But he hasn't contributed a single dollar to the household. And of course, that didn't change after Allison moved in. Kyle looked awkwardly at Allison in response to my words, but Allison just kept her face stern and glared at me. Well, you can start with vacuuming or cleaning the shower room. We're family now, so let's cooperate. That's what Michelle is saying. Morgan backed me up, speaking to Kyle and Allison. With Morgan's support, I thought things would start to improve, but I was perhaps too optimistic. The next day, Kyle and Allison began treating me as if I were invisible. As for Allison helping with the chores, not really. At most, she started putting away their laundry after I washed and cleaned it. Of course, Morgan was just as perplexed about it as I was. I can't understand what these fools are thinking. I'll talk to Kyle about it. And he did talk to Kyle. However, Allison doesn't want to talk to Michelle, was the reply I got, and it just added to my frustrations. Of course, during all this, Morgan had suggested they move out and try living on their own. But Kyle rejected this idea, saying it would be a waste of money. He doesn't seem to realize that living in your parents' home isn't meant to be free. Kyle and Allison continued their usual ways, never cleaning or tidying up. Kyle, please tidy up a bit. Allison, could you help with preparing the meal? Kyle, look at this video, it's hilarious. Even when I spoke, Allison wouldn't take her eyes off her mobile phone. Instead, she blatantly ignored me. But if I gave up now, it would be the end of us as a family. Morgan told me to just let it be, but I kept trying to communicate. However, 3 months of being ignored by Kyle and Allison took its toll, and the daily stress made me ill. I couldn't get up due to severe dizziness and a headache, and I couldn't do the cleaning or laundry. Just take it easy and rest. You need a break once in a while, Morgan said with a smile before leaving for work, and I decided to take his advice and rest. What the heck? No cleaning done? But I was awakened by Allison's loud voice. What? No breakfast either? Some housewife mom is. I get lectured, yet LOL, which mouth is she talking out of? It seemed Kyle and Allison had woken up. They spoke ill of me loudly enough for me to hear, laughing boisterously. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't want to cry out of frustration, but it seemed like I had been pushing myself too much. And then it was evening that day. After resting the whole day, I got a call from Morgan. Michelle, how are you feeling? Sorry, I said I'd bring dinner, but some urgent work came up, and I won't be home until after 8 p.m. Oh, is that so? Sorry for making you worry. I'm feeling a bit better, so it's okay. I'll try to get home as soon as I can. Just rest up, Morgan said and hung up the phone. He must have been in a hurry, taking the time to call amidst his busy schedule. I'm truly grateful that Morgan is always on my side. As Morgan suggested, I decided to rest up and wait for him to come home. I stepped out of the room a bit. And I was shocked when I passed through the living room. Candy wrappers and pizza boxes were scattered around, left as they were. Pajamas were thrown on the sofa, left where they were taken off, and there was no sign of vacuuming. Kyle was at work, so it must have been Allison's doing. Just then, Kyle came home. He sighed with a look of annoyance when he saw me. You're back. I greeted him, but no response. Allison, sensing Kyle's return, came down from the upstairs. And just like Kyle, she sighed with annoyance upon seeing me. Allison, please tidy up, I said, but of course, Allison ignored me as usual. Time passed, and the living room remained a mess. With a resigned look on my face, knowing that my words were futile, I stepped into the room. Hey, Mom. What about dinner? Kyle spoke to me for the first time in months. But of course, I didn't feel like responding. Hey, ignoring me? That's pretty rude. Kyle snapped at my silence. Then, Allison looked at me and said, "Finished cleaning yet? You better hurry up or Morgan will be back." She said this, mocking me, laughing as she stood in the cluttered living room. What kind of people are they? They probably can't even imagine that I fell ill because of Kyle and Allison. Seeing me stunned, the two of them laughed, and I reached my breaking point. From that day on, I decided to completely ignore the two of them. I used to do their laundry and cook for them, but not anymore. I told Morgan about this decision along with the day's events last night. Morgan was frowning, arms crossed, but he said I could do as I pleased. So today, I prepared dinner just for Morgan and myself and set the table. "What do you mean there's no food for us? Is this some kind of harassment? That's really mean." Kyle was furious as soon as he saw the dining table. Allison seemed angry too. But I had no intention of responding. Coincidentally, it was Kyle's favorite gratin since childhood, but I doubt I'll ever make it for him again. Morgan didn't respond to Kyle or Allison's words either. Seeing our reaction, Kyle clicked his tongue and headed to the kitchen to search for food. That's when Morgan spoke up. "That instant ramen costs $3 a piece." Hearing that, Kyle looked up. "What?" he exclaimed. "What do you mean?" "It means exactly that. It's bought with my money, Michelle got it. If you're not going to do chores or contribute to living expenses, then pay for each item." I was surprised. Morgan is very kind. He's always been that way, both towards me and the kids. I appreciated him getting angry after yesterday's talk, but I didn't expect him to be this strict with Kyle. Using the shower is $5 per person, and sleeping here is $10 per night. If you want Michelle to cook for you, it's $8 per meal. I have more to say, but if you can't cooperate as a family, at least pay those amounts. Kyle clicked his tongue at Morgan's words and threw the instant ramen he was holding in frustration. Allison then spoke up. "Are you serious? Charging your own family money?" But Morgan calmly responded, "It's Kyle and Allison who've been exploiting the family without contributing. Michelle and I have said this countless times. We even suggested dissolving the cohabitation. If you still want to live here, then it's only fair to pay the equivalent value." Allison was speechless, probably unable to refute his logic. But she bit her lip. "Ah, you can use the kitchen and fridge. For now, you don't have to pay utilities. Just make sure you clean up after yourself. And buy your own groceries." Kyle was red with anger. But like Allison, he seemed unable to say anything in response. "This is ridiculous. I can't believe this. Are you kidding me?" They spewed childish insults and, stomping like children, returned to their room. Morgan and I exchanged glances and couldn't help but laugh. But their silence only lasted that day. The next day, they resumed using the shower and staying overnight as if nothing had changed. Allison showed no signs of cooking, and the frozen food and instant noodles I bought kept disappearing. Of course, they still hadn't paid a dime. I didn't want to talk to them anymore, so I said nothing about it. A few days later, Kyle and Allison were set to go on their honeymoon. I had intended to give them some money if we had a good relationship, but that was no longer the case. Don't expect any souvenirs. I wish we never have to come back. Their mood seemed lifted by the trip, and they even started complaining to Morgan. "Well, you don't have to come back if you don't want to," I blurted out unintentionally. Hearing that, Allison glared at me with a sullen face. Despite their own words, I was amazed at their attitude as they left with their large suitcases. Once I confirmed they were away from the house, Morgan and I sprang into action. A moving company would arrive in a few hours. Yes, we decided to move out of the house while they were away. We had reached our limit of tolerance for living together. Despite our efforts, Kyle and Allison only depended on us and took advantage. We thought it better to just get rid of such a house. Kyle and Allison had been ignoring me all along. Morgan and I decided, ignoring them in return, that this was the best course of action. Our destination was Olivia's house. Olivia, aware of Kyle and Allison's terrible behavior and their treatment and insults towards me, had been inviting us over for a while. But it wasn't satisfying to just leave and let them take over the house. So we came up with a plan to sell the house and land while they were away. The new owner was already decided, and we had made the contract long ago. While our belongings were being moved out, a demolition company also arrived. Everything in Kyle's room was arranged to be disposed of. Important items and a few days' worth of clothes would be with them on their trip, so it wouldn't be a problem if they were gone. With the contracts signed and neighbors notified, we started the demolition as soon as the house was emptied. It was a house we lived in for a long time, but the feeling of liberation far outweighed any sentimentality. Michelle, shall we go? Let's go. Leaving the rest to the demolition crew, Morgan and I got into the car. Together with the moving company, we headed to Olivia's house. And a week later, the place where the house stood was already cleared and turned into an empty lot. And today was the day Kyle and Allison were returning from their trip. As expected, from the evening they arrived at what used to be their home, our phones started ringing. But neither Morgan nor I answered the phone. They must be panicking now that they've found the house gone. Soon enough, Olivia's phone also started ringing. Of course, it was Kyle. Olivia answered the phone with a smile. Yes? Olivia, it's terrible. The house is gone. Kyle's panicked voice from the get-go made me inadvertently laugh. Olivia, with a grin, responded to Kyle. The house is gone. What do you mean? Her exaggerated acting made me want to laugh even more. Anyway, there's nothing here. Dad and Mom are gone too. Then, from the other end of the line, Allison spoke. Olivia, you know something, don't you? Olivia responded irritably to that. Allison, even if I did know, why would I have any obligation to tell Kyle and you? I know how you've been troubling Dad and Mom. Wait, so Olivia, you were on their side? Kyle's words made Olivia laugh. Side? It's just the truth. Morgan intervened just as it seemed the phone call would turn into an argument. After switching the phone from Olivia, he began to speak. Anyway, the house is gone as you see. This means the cohabitation is over. Dad, how can you do this without consulting us? I'm your son. The house that Grandpa passed down should have been mine to inherit. This is outrageous. I was flabbergasted by Kyle's words. Morgan, sitting beside me, started to laugh heartily. What is Kyle talking about? That house and land are in Michelle's name. There's nothing I inherited from Dad to pass on. There's nothing to give to Kyle. What do you mean? That house, Mom's property? I've never heard of that. Kyle was freaking out on the other end of the phone. He apparently didn't know. That land was bought with the money I saved and invested before I got married. Morgan and I lived in an apartment for a while after getting married, but the investments went well, and the money kept growing. So, before the kids started elementary school, we bought that land and house. Although they are now in a facility, we had even called the in-laws' house to live together when the kids were young. Kyle, having lived in that house since he was little, must have mistakenly thought it was originally owned by Morgan's dad. Of course, we never hid the fact that the house was in my name. Only Olivia knew about it. Kyle and Allison should reflect on the current situation as a result of their presumptions, lack of effort, and not valuing me. Raising your voice will only disturb the neighbors, so find a hotel or sleep outside today, whatever you prefer. Wait, Dad. Ignoring Kyle's words, Morgan hung up the phone. Haha, it's their own fault, isn't it? Olivia was laughing so hard, clutching her stomach. I, too, couldn't help but smile at the thought of the two of them in despair. The next morning, early on, Olivia's house doorbell rang. Predictably, it was Kyle and Allison. Should I handle this? Olivia's husband offered, but Morgan and I shook our heads. We can't impose on you any further. We'll handle it, it's fine. Morgan and I stood at the front door. To avoid disturbing the neighbors, we decided to speak at the entrance. As I unlocked the doorknob turned with incredible force. I braced myself, thinking Kyle would lash out, but Morgan shielded me. Contrary to our expectations, as soon as Kyle burst in, he immediately began apologizing deeply. Dad, Mom, I'm truly sorry. We were wrong. Next to him, Allison, also in tears, sobbed. We never realized how upset Morgan and Michelle were. We meant it as a joke, but we hurt you, and we're truly sorry. Their words only infuriated me more. A joke? You freeloaded for a year and then ignored me for 3 months. You think you can pass that off as a joke? We're apologizing, aren't we? An apology doesn't fix anything. I've warned you both repeatedly. You never listened to any of those warnings. Morgan's shout made Kyle and Allison freeze. Let me make one thing clear. The money I've spent so far has gone to living expenses and tuition. Now, all the property and savings are in Michelle's name. Everything that Kyle and Allison have ignored and made Michelle suffer for is Michelle's. Don't even think about inheriting anything. Kyle and Allison turned pale and started trembling at those words. I had never seen Morgan display such anger. Feeling blessed to have Morgan, who was so fiercely protective, I simultaneously wondered how we ended up raising such a monster like Kyle. I pondered if our parenting was flawed, even though I had thought I gave both Olivia and Kyle the same love and care. It made me think that perhaps there is an inherent nature in people. Kyle and Allison, ejected from Olivia's house, left without the initial vigor, dragging their large suitcases behind them. Apparently, they had splurged on their honeymoon and had no money left even to rent an apartment. They were distributing honeymoon souvenirs while asking friends for money, which I found utterly exasperating. What a miserable couple they were. Kyle and Allison, having lost their home, money, and parents. For now, they seemed to be staying in an internet cafe, but apparently, they once couldn't pay the fee and called Olivia. It's none of my business. Why don't you sell your rings and make some money yourselves? Olivia said this to me, laughing as she recounted pushing them away. I didn't know this, but apparently, Kyle and Allison's wedding rings were from a high-end brand, embedded with diamonds. They could surely pay the rent for an apartment if they sold those, but I can't understand their mentality of begging others without sacrificing anything they own. Olivia said. I certainly agree with that. After that, the calls ceased. They probably did as Olivia suggested, selling rings or bags to get a house. They need to learn the hard work of paying for utilities and doing household chores themselves. Morgan and I continue to live happily at Olivia's house. Morgan seems to enjoy drinking with Olivia's husband, and I thoroughly enjoy my new life playing with grandchildren, having lunch with Olivia, and more. To not trouble Olivia with inheritance issues, I've been paying for living expenses, and we plan to go on many family vacations. Though Morgan and I are still young, we want to spend our twilight years using up our money, leaving behind plenty of joyful memories, ready for our departure to heaven. I was sick in bed, which caused a huge delay in preparing for Christmas. While I was busily working, my husband Oliver had gone out somewhere. Entering Oliver's room, I noticed a bag sticking out of a drawer. I picked it up. Inside the bag was an SD card. Seeing it placed with a message card that read "For Oliver," I had a bad feeling. Just as Oliver returned home, I waited for him to take a shower and sneaked back into his room to check the contents on the computer. "What is this?" I was shocked at the footage. At the same time, anger surged through me. I'm going to divorce him. Determined, I gathered our relatives at our home the next day. "Now, please look at this." As my voice caught the attention of the relatives and Oliver towards the TV, I pressed the play button. The scene that appeared left our relatives speechless and Oliver pale. Why? To Oliver, who turned to me in disbelief, I smiled and handed him the divorce papers. I will never forgive him, I'll make him regret this. My name is Sophia. A 34-year-old housewife. My parents passed away early, but thanks to a large inheritance and the kindness of the neighbors, I could pursue my dream job as a preschool teacher. I resigned from teaching when I was 30. To marry my childhood friend, Oliver. The catalyst for our relationship was my parents' accidental death. Being a high school student and facing college entrance exams, I didn't want to move. I was determined to attend the college my parents had supported. However, my relatives, eyeing the large inheritance left by my parents, tried to take me in. Almost strangers to me, their intentions felt creepy. Oliver, my husband-to-be, shooed these relatives away when I was vulnerable from losing my parents. Oliver, the eldest son of our neighboring family, was like an older brother to me. In front of the relatives, he declared, "We'll take care of her. We have permission from my parents, so no complaints. Sophia will be my wife in the future." Surprised by Oliver's words, who I had always seen as a brother, he turned out to be serious, confessing his feelings later. His earnest nature and the security he provided became my solace, and we started dating. Oliver always prioritized me, and eventually, I genuinely fell in love with him. When I became comfortable in my job as a preschool teacher, he proposed. I meant what I said when we were students. My feelings haven't changed. I will make you happy, marry me. Absolutely. Overwhelmed, I accepted his proposal with tears. Telling his parents, they rejoiced, and we celebrated that night. After marrying and 2 years of marriage, I retired to become a housewife. Oliver had requested me to become a housewife, something that triggered this change. Though it was sad to leave my dream job, I decided to focus on having children and use my experience in parenting. Oliver has a younger sister. Emma, my sister-in-law, was my classmate since kindergarten. She was also my best friend and colleague at the childcare center. Emma had mixed feelings about me marrying Oliver. That is because she and Oliver don't get along. Oliver has always been kind to you, but unreasonable to me. Really? Absolutely. I often listened without arguing, as Emma insisted. According to Emma, she was delighted to have me as a relative. But not as Oliver's wife. Pretending to lament, she often complained about marrying her disliked brother. From my perspective, though Oliver might be somewhat cold to Emma, it was clear they were still connected by blood. However, Emma didn't seem to think so, often showing dissatisfaction when I suggested this. Sophia, you say that because you don't know Oliver's true face. I wonder. I always responded, doubting Emma's claims. Looking back, I regret not paying more attention, but at that time, I thought it was just sibling dynamics. But even after 5 years of marriage, we didn't have any children. Then, I noticed a gradual change in Oliver's attitude. At first, he complained about our housework being split equally since I became a housewife, and soon, I was doing 90% of it. Without kids and just relaxing at home all day, you could at least do a bit more housework, right? These unkind words, something the old Oliver would never say, hurt me, but I accepted them as my duty as a housewife. From there, Oliver started to push more household responsibilities on me, citing my role as a housewife. One day, while visiting my in-laws, Oliver suddenly started belittling me, laughing. "Sophia's cooking is just awful. And her cleaning is so sloppy, can't she do something about it?" The living room fell silent, but Oliver didn't notice. In fact, he began to mock me even more. "The laundry is also carelessly done, she hardly works at all for a housewife." I could feel Emma getting irritated beside me. Isabella, my mother-in-law, smiled, but her eyes weren't laughing. I had to say something. I might be a bit absent-minded at times, so maybe Oliver finds me lacking in some ways. But there's a way to say things. Emma glared at Oliver as she spoke. Oliver glared back, and the living room atmosphere turned tense. Then Lucas, as my father-in-law, began to speak calmly. "A husband should help with his wife's shortcomings. Besides, Sophia always helps us out a lot." Oliver, discontented, kept quiet at Lucas's words. Emma was still angry, but Isabella calmed her down. The mood was ruined because of Oliver's words. I tried to lighten the mood, clapping my hands and smiling. "Hey! I made a cake, would you like to have some? Sophia's cakes are delicious. I'm so happy, let's eat." Emma's mood brightened instantly, and I felt relieved. Then Isabella, Emma, and I moved to the kitchen. "Sorry about Oliver earlier. We know how hard you always work, Sophia. Don't push yourself too much." "Isabella, thank you." Isabella's kind words almost brought me to tears. Returning to the living room, Oliver sat turned away, looking more upset than before. "I brought the cake." "I don't want it." "But it's your favorite pumpkin cake." "I said I don't want it." As Oliver yelled, the plate with the cake disappeared from my hands. Looking down, the smashed cake was stuck to the floor. "Oliver! Apologize to Sophia! It's her fault for forcing it on me." Oliver, though looking confused, refused to apologize to me. I was a little saddened. He used to apologize immediately in the past. "That's awful. Sophia, you should divorce him." "What? Don't be ridiculous. It's not your decision to make." Emma and Oliver started bickering, ignoring me, and their argument heated up. "Unlovable women can't get married. When I get married is none of your business." I desperately tried to calm down the shouting Emma. Oliver, looking at us in disdain, laughed and left, saying he was going out for a drink. "Oliver's been going out a lot lately. Yeah, he never tells me where he's going." "Don't worry too much, I'll ask around too." I thanked the ever-kind Isabella. My in-laws always doted on me, treating me like their own daughter. They scolded me when I was wrong, feeling like a second set of parents. Part of the reason I married Oliver was because of my relationship with my in-laws. The thought of becoming a family with my beloved in-laws and Emma made me happy. But it was true that I still loved Oliver. However, since then, Oliver's treatment of me became increasingly harsh. "I'm going out." "Again? Where have you been going every weekend recently?" "Anywhere I want." After a while, Oliver started going out somewhere every weekend. Sometimes even staying overnight, but he stubbornly refused to tell me where. Moreover, he was always angry, and our usual conversations diminished. I once asked if I had done something wrong. But I never got a satisfying answer. Amidst this, as Christmas approached, I fell ill. Isabella came to help at our house. It took about a week to fully recover, and I had to start preparing for Christmas slowly, dragging my heavy body around, since Oliver wouldn't help. I was sick in bed, which caused a huge delay in preparing for Christmas. While I was busily working, Oliver had gone out somewhere. Entering Oliver's room, I noticed a bag sticking out of a drawer. I picked it up. Inside the bag was an SD card. Seeing it with a message card that read "For Oliver," I had a bad feeling. Just as Oliver returned home, I waited for him to take a shower and sneaked back into his room to check the contents on the computer. What is this? I was speechless at the footage. At the same time, anger surged through me. I'm going to divorce him. Determined, I gathered our relatives at our in-laws' house the next day. Now, please look at this. As my voice directed the relatives and Oliver towards the TV, I pressed the play button. The scene that appeared left our relatives speechless, and Oliver turned pale. Why? As Oliver looked at me in disbelief, I smiled and handed him the divorce papers. I will never forgive him, I'll make him regret this. Seeing the divorce papers, Oliver's face turned even bluer. Wait, hold on. Divorce is too sudden. What are you talking about? After seeing that video, there's no other option but divorce. Oliver felt silent at my words. The content of the SD card was a childbirth scene. Of course, it wasn't mine. A young woman was struggling through labor. At first, I wondered why such a thing existed, but then I recognized the man beside the woman. It was unmistakably Oliver, stroking the woman's head and encouraging her. Keep going! I couldn't mistake Oliver's voice, having known him since childhood. This is... I was just standing in, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me. I turned up the volume on the TV. Then a conversation between the woman and Oliver filled the living room. Evelyn! It's almost time! Our child is about to be born! Oliver, yes, I'll keep going! After their conversation, a baby's cry could be heard. Then Oliver kissed the woman named Evelyn, thanking her repeatedly. You did great. You worked so hard. I did it for you, my love. I love you too. Oh, Evelyn. I can't wait to live with you and our child. Me either. After saying that and kissing again, the video stopped. The relatives in the living room were stunned, and my in-laws and Emma were visibly trembling with anger. Well, after watching this, no one would believe he was just standing in as a proxy. This is... I just got carried away, it was just an act of a father. Lucas is usually a calm person, suddenly stepped forward and slapped Oliver. Oliver held his cheek in shock. Lucas was a gentleman who only got angry when necessary, and had never resorted to physical action. Everyone was surprised by this. Do you understand what you're saying? Don't you feel sorry for Sophia? But this is... Even then, Oliver tried desperately to explain himself. Emma spoke up in a calm voice. I've always disliked you, but I thought I could maintain our relationship if you cherished my best friend. But someone who hurts my important friend can't be considered family. I'm cutting ties with you. At Emma's words, Oliver's face turned red with anger. You, a younger sister, are so presumptuous. If you want to cut ties, go ahead. It's a relief. Then I'll cut ties too. Oliver froze at Isabella's words, said with a smile. He tries to hide it, but Oliver is quite the mama's boy. I like Isabella too, so it never really bothered me, but to be honest, I didn't really like how he clung to her, even nearing 40. Oliver seemed bewildered by Isabella's declaration of cutting ties. But I'm the eldest son, right? Mom, you're joking about cutting ties, right? Do you think I'm someone who would joke in this situation? No. Isabella never lost her smile. That made it even scarier, and the whispering relatives straightened up and began listening quietly to her. Isabella continued in a calm and steady voice. Don't worry about us. After all, we have Sophia. If she remarries someone wonderful and has children, they will be our grandchildren. What? If she divorces, she's a stranger, right? Not just Isabella, but Lucas, Emma, and I all sighed heavily at Oliver's response. In fact, after marrying, I had been legally adopted by my in-laws. It wasn't necessary, but my own relatives, eyeing my parents' inheritance, often pressured me into an adoption agreement. Your parents' inheritance is yours to use as you wish. But to protect you from those relatives, why don't you consider being legally adopted by us? After my parents passed away, my in-laws never asked me for money. I had prepared tuition and living expenses from my inheritance and gave the living expenses to my in-laws. However, they didn't touch it, saying it was important money, and when I got a job, they even added a celebration gift and returned it to me. I initially refused, but they insisted, so I gratefully accepted. Because of this history, I trusted Isabella's words. That's why I consulted with Oliver and got legally adopted right after our marriage. It seemed Oliver had completely forgotten about it.
No, but even if I was adopted, I'm the eldest son, the real child. That's right. I have a child. This house is mine.
Oliver, as if he had remembered something important, was met with laughter from Isabella. What are you talking about? As of today, you are no longer my child. Well, legally you'll still be my child, but we'll have to renounce your inheritance. Oliver was speechless at the decisive words. Tears streamed down his face from the rejection of his beloved Isabella. I added to Oliver's misery. By the way, do you know why I called everyone here today? Oliver looked at me, puzzled. His tear-stained face was dirty. I felt a bit pathetic for having loved such a pitiful man. Christmas was always celebrated at my in-laws' house. They were landowners in the area, with many relatives nearby. There was no other place that could accommodate our large family of nearly 50 people. But this time, we limited the number of people, having only families with children come from the relative side. So, there were only about 20 people in the living room, half of the usual number. It seemed Oliver hadn't even noticed that. After I pointed it out, he finally realized.
There are no children? But I hear crying. Are they in another room?
Oh, actually, we have a guest today. Please, come in. At my words, Emma stood up and opened the door at the back. There stood Evelyn, confidently with a baby in her arms. Evelyn stood there, holding the baby. Her demeanor saying she belonged and was welcomed.
Nice to meet you, Isabella. I'm Evelyn. This is Liam, our son, the fruit of my love with Oliver.
Evelyn said this cheerfully, but Isabella frowned. Though behind a door, she must have heard the conversation. But then I noticed the earphones in Evelyn's hands.
Were you listening to music in the next room?
Yeah, I was bored. Evelyn's attitude towards Isabella was starkly indifferent. She acted as if she was the rightful wife, and I was irritated, but realized she would soon be.
Do you know why you were invited today? Isn't it because you're getting a divorce? And then I'll be Oliver's wife. We have Liam too, so it's a celebration, right?
Her naive thinking made me sigh. In this atmosphere, thinking it's a celebration is just unbelievable. Oliver was frozen by the suddenness of it all, but seeing Evelyn's cluelessness seemed to bring him back to reality. Evelyn, we're in the middle of a difficult conversation. I'll contact you later, just wait a little longer.
I can't wait anymore. Write the divorce papers now.
Evelyn said this, handing a pen to Oliver. Then she looked at me, smirking in a mocking way. Sophia, was it? Thank you for your service until today. From now on, I will be the one receiving Oliver's love. Even with her triumphant tone, I just found it outright creepy. Since I saw that video of the childbirth scene, my love for Oliver is completely lost. I don't need his love, even if he begged me to take it. But to Evelyn, it seemed like I was regretful. Sorry about that. Oliver says I have firmer skin and am prettier to hold than you. He said you're like a skinny chicken. Evelyn laughed dismissively, with Oliver awkwardly trying to stop her. The onlookers' eyes were cold towards the two of them. I decided to respond with a smile and addressed Evelyn's comment.
No, thank you for keeping him company. I don't need him anymore, so please take him.
Evelyn's eyebrows twitched slightly at my words. She seemed about to say something, but I ignored her and continued. Well, you're getting a man who's about to be disowned, lose his house and job, and become poor. Evelyn's face clouded over. She probably thought that after Oliver and I divorced, she would stay in this house. While thinking how she would have known otherwise if she had listened earlier, I continued to smile at Evelyn.
Oliver, wait. Sophia's the one leaving, right? This is Oliver's house, right? I'm becoming your wife, right? You said I could be the housewife.
Evelyn confronted Oliver. Oliver looked uncomfortable and avoided her gaze.
Oliver, look at me. What are we going to do? I quit my job, remember? You said Liam could stay with Isabella and we'd live in luxury.
Evelyn started to freak out, scratching her hair. Startled by her shouting, Liam also began to cry, his cries echoing in the living room. I reluctantly took Liam from Evelyn and held him. He must be about 4 months old, just starting to hold his head up, and he was very cute. When I gently rocked him, he calmed down and fell asleep again. Relieved, I noticed Evelyn glaring at me.
Give him back. That's my and Oliver's child. The grandchild of this house.
He just fell asleep, so please don't raise your voice. While I was speaking, Evelyn snatched Liam back from me and returned him to the baby carrier. Liam woke up for a moment, but fell asleep again as Evelyn rocked him. I looked at her, relieved. Evelyn was glaring at me as if I were her sworn enemy.
You think you can just take Liam away? You're useless. A woman who can't get pregnant should leave this house.
At Evelyn's words, I realized Oliver hadn't told her about that incident. It was about why I quit my job as a preschool teacher.
Evelyn, didn't Oliver tell you why we didn't have children?
I don't know.
Isn't it because you're not loved?
Evelyn said this, looking triumphant. As if she was superior as a woman. But that didn't matter to me. Oliver was pale-faced in the background, but I continued, revealing the truth.
Oliver, I've always been unable to have children.
Evelyn's momentum stopped abruptly, as if it were a lie. The surrounding relatives were also stunned. Actually, I quit my job after having a miscarriage. I wanted children so badly, I went for a checkup for the first time when I tried to conceive. Oliver also had tests done with me. The results showed no issues with me, but Oliver had a condition making it difficult for him to have children. It wasn't impossible, but a natural conception was highly unlikely. The pregnancy we had was a miracle, but it ended due to genetic issues. I was sad, but wanted to try again. Oliver felt the same, so we started fertility treatments. Fortunately, there was still plenty of inheritance left, so I quit my job on Oliver's suggestion, to focus on my health. However, we saw no success with the treatments, and when we started considering adoption, Oliver became reluctant. Looking back, he probably started his affair during our treatments, and Evelyn's pregnancy came to light around the time we talked about adoption. Evelyn turned pale upon hearing this and looked at Oliver.
So, Evelyn, is Liam really Oliver's child? It's not impossible, right? Our love.
Her talking about love at this point was just absurd. I smiled and said again. That's why I said, natural conception is almost impossible.
But.
Evelyn was flustered, trying to make excuses. Emma cut her off.
Stop lying. You're my friend's wife, right? What?
Oliver looked at Emma, wide-eyed. Emma nodded at me and showed Evelyn her mobile phone screen. It showed Evelyn and Liam, a man, and a 4-year-old girl I didn't know. I had contacted Emma after watching the video the day before. Emma recognized Evelyn from the photo on SNS, belonging to a man she knew.
I knew it was Evelyn by her name and face. We work at the same place and talk often. You're married?
Oliver asked, but Evelyn didn't answer. Her expression confirmed Emma's words were true.
It was a shotgun wedding, right? No talk of divorce, and this photo says Liam is that man's child. No.
True love, huh?
Pretending your husband's child is another man's, to switch to a richer man. Is it the money you love?
Emma looked down on Evelyn with disdain. Evelyn, red-faced and shaking, didn't know how to respond and just looked down. By the way, I've called that man, he'll be here soon.
No! It was just a moment of weakness. Please don't tell my husband.
It's too late for that. At Emma's words, the doorbell rang, and Evelyn collapsed in despair. A relative opened the door, and Evelyn's husband, Henry, came in. He saw Evelyn and immediately shouted in anger.
You've been cheating on me? What were you thinking? It's not like that. It's a misunderstanding. I heard everything on the phone.
Realizing there was no escape, Evelyn froze in tears. Henry took Liam from her and stood up. Then apologized to us. My wife has caused you a lot of trouble. We will divorce.
Wait, I don't want a divorce.
Henry looked down on Evelyn coldly.
You promised to stop after the affair 3 years ago. And you continued. I'll raise the child. You won't see him again.
We were shocked by Henry's words. I couldn't believe that even though he had noticed it once, he continued to do it behind the scenes. Such audacity to claim a momentary lapse. 3 years ago, huh?
No, Sophia, it's not like that.
What's different?
Going around marking your territory elsewhere?
At my words, Oliver just trembled, barely moving his mouth. I'm not usually one to get angry. But Emma once told me it's scary when I do. I'd hardly ever been angry with Oliver, so he seemed surprised by my attitude. I'm disappointed in you.
I can't believe you've been betraying your family for so long. I tried to get you and Emma to reconcile, but it looks like I was the one who couldn't see clearly.
Emma nodded as if to say, finally you understand. Oliver was stunned by my straightforwardness.
I'll be asking for compensation. And of course, child support.
Eh? I touched my stomach. I had been keeping it a secret, except from Emma, planning to announce it at Christmas. I was pregnant. The reason I'd been feeling unwell recently was morning sickness. After entering the stable period, I planned to surprise my parents and Oliver. The artificial insemination worked. It's truly your child. I kept quiet because I didn't want to get your hopes up and then disappoint you.
So.
Oliver collapsed, overwhelmed by my words. Evelyn, too, seemed drained of all energy to argue after hearing about my pregnancy and her own impending divorce. Then, please fill out the divorce papers. I said this and handed Oliver a pen. Then I left the house first with Emma. By now, Oliver must be getting glared at by the in-laws while filling out the divorce papers. Feeling refreshed after saying everything I wanted, I enjoyed a leisurely tea party with Emma. Later, Oliver and I finalized our divorce. Since his job was with a family company, he was fired due to this incident and ended up penniless and out of the house. Evelyn got divorced too and initially demanded money from Oliver. But seeing his situation, she quickly disappeared. In the end, Oliver had been working in a rundown snack bar to pay for the alimony and child support, but rumors have it that he was caught by some bad customers and taken away. I know about this because Emma, laughing about the fleeting nature of true love, told me. It was information from Henry, Evelyn's ex-husband. Lately, he's been going out more with his children, and it seems that Oliver's story comes up in their conversations. Henry, in fact, was the one Emma had a crush on during her student days. Though he reciprocated her feelings, he married Evelyn when she got pregnant. Emma denies it, but her blushing suggests that maybe, just maybe, spring is near for her. After Oliver left, my in-laws were initially down, but they recovered while I was busy with pregnancy preparations. Now they dote on their grandchild, becoming loving grandparents. At first, they were hesitant, feeling guilty towards me, but eventually, they began treating me like their real daughter again. Living together since birth, Emma jokes about how it's hard to tell who is the real daughter now. As for me, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl without any trouble. She's a very cute girl. I hope she grows up to be bright and cheerful like Emma. My friend and now sister, who I admire. Sophia. She won't stop crying.
Okay, I'm coming.
I hear my daughter's cries and Emma's troubled voice from the living room. Smiling, I responded and left the balcony. Outside, the sky is clear and cloudless. A future full of promises awaits us. Just like this bright blue sky. Factory worker father? Breaking off the engagement. As soon as she said that, Edith, my mother-in-law, threw her coffee at my dad. Beside her, laughing, my father-in-law, John, made no move to stop Edith. Coffee stains quickly spread across the suit Dad had specially cleaned for this day. Fortunately, the coffee was lukewarm and there was no risk of a burn. I offered Dad a handkerchief in surprise, while Timothy frantically tried to clean his suit. While worrying about any injuries, Timothy scolded his parents, who just kept laughing. During this, Dad said nothing, simply stood up, pointed at them, and declared, "Then I'll just have to ruin your company." He said this in a voice I had never heard before, took my hand, and we left the house. Behind us, Timothy's shouts at his parents echoed, and soon he followed us. "I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure my parents apologize later." "No need. It's over. We're cutting ties," he said somberly, patting Timothy on the shoulder. "My name is Penelope, a 26-year-old office worker. My family has a bit of a unique situation. I grew up without a mom. She passed away when I was young, and Dad raised me single-handedly. Despite being busy as a factory manager, he never missed a school event. He'd often rush back to work after these events, but I've always respected him deeply for it. During college, I dated Timothy, who was 2 years my senior. He was gentle, sincere, and popular at university. Despite knowing it was a long shot, I confessed to him, and he accepted. However, Timothy had his worries, mainly about his parents. He spoke of them only in vague terms, never delving into details. It seemed there was some conflict with them, but I didn't press, though it troubled me. Still, Timothy himself was flawless, so our relationship continued. He lived alone since starting university, but occasionally visited his parents. He'd return exhausted, clearly stressed about them. He always put me first, making him my pride and joy. I had always wanted to introduce him to Dad, the man I respected and my beloved boyfriend. I wondered how they would react to each other. One day, while on a date, we unexpectedly bumped into Dad. "Oh, Dad. Aren't you supposed to be at work? What are you doing here?"
"Ah, Penelope. Just returning from a client." "And who's this?"
"Oh, this is Timothy. We're dating." Dad, not usually stern but with a somewhat fierce look, can be misunderstood. Timothy was very nervous meeting Dad for the first time. "Nice to meet you, I'm Timothy. I am fortunate to be dating Penelope." Timothy greeted Dad quickly in a tense manner. Dad warmly accepted him, chatting and laughing with him. "So, you're Penelope's boyfriend. Don't be so nervous. Take good care of her." "Yes, I will. Thank you." As they continued talking, Timothy's nervousness faded, and they got along well. I was relieved to see the two most important men in my life getting along. I had worried about Dad's reaction, but he had to return to work. So we parted ways. After Dad left, I turned to Timothy, who seemed to be in a daze. When I asked what was wrong, he suddenly became excited. "That was really your dad, right?" I was puzzled by his unexpected words, but since it was the truth, I answered without hesitation. "Yes, that was my dad." "Is there something wrong with that?" "Right, that makes sense, that was him, huh?" He crossed his arms and seemed lost in thought for a while. Curious, I decided to ask him what was on his mind. "What are you thinking about so hard? Did you not like him?" "No way, that's not it. I do like him, but, well." His hesitant reply was all I got, and any further questions were evaded. I became anxious as he wouldn't tell me the reason. I wondered if, despite his words, he actually found it hard to get along with my dad. And so, I began to worry unnecessarily. A few days later, Timothy called me out, saying he had something important to talk about. Maybe because of the recent meeting with my dad, I felt unusually nervous as I went to our meeting spot. When I arrived at the cafe, he was already there. Through the glass, I could see him looking downcast. This deepened my anxiety, but I decided to act cheerfully anyway. As I entered the cafe and approached him slowly, I said, "Timothy, sorry, did you wait long?" I crept up behind him and spoke, tapping his shoulder, which startled him.
Penelope, you scared me.
Startled, he caught his breath as he saw me. And I was surprised to see how much I had startled him. He had been that deep in thought. Sitting opposite the still gloomy him, I placed our order. His continued gloom only increased my anxiety. Desperate to hear what was on his mind, I spoke to him. "Hey, Timothy. What's bothering you so much? Didn't you like my dad?" When I asked, Timothy looked up and immediately denied it. "No, not at all. I actually respect your dad. That's why my. He stopped mid-sentence and looked down again, causing me to sigh. Realizing I had no choice but to press for an answer, I asked directly. "If you have a problem, I want to know. What's troubling you?" He took a deep breath as if making up his mind, then began to share. "I have something to tell you about my parents. It's a long story, but I need you to hear it all." The story he shared was shocking. According to him, his parents lacked grace and only judged people by their education and jobs. He had suffered a lot because of them, as they habitually interfered with his life. Whenever he introduced a girlfriend, they would criticize her and drive her away. The women would leave, often in tears, breaking up with him. That's why he wanted to marry me, but was troubled about bringing up his parents. But that's not a problem. We just don't have to involve them after getting married, and endure only during the marriage proposal. Dad seemed to like Timothy, so what was the issue? "I don't mind about that, it's okay. Dad liked you too, so don't worry." "Really? That makes me happy. When I first met your dad, I was shocked to see how different he was from my own parents. I thought, if I marry Penelope, I'll become the son of such a great dad, even if it's just by marriage. But getting married means your parents become mine too, and I couldn't make up my mind." He brightened up when I mentioned Dad liked him, but then he sighed deeply again. However, an idea seemed to strike him, and he looked up, apologizing. "When we go to my parents to announce our marriage, can your dad come with us? I want them to know such an admirable person exists. It might not change them immediately, but I hope it will make them rethink." "Okay. I'll talk to Dad. But I wish you had told me this more straightforwardly."
"Oh, sorry. I'll properly do it now."
Realizing his oversight, he hastily made a proper marriage proposal. Having accepted his proposal, I decided to discuss it with Dad. Initially reluctant, Dad agreed to join us for the marriage proposal visit after Timothy asked. We then coordinated with Timothy to schedule a visit to his parents. On the day of the visit, we stood in front of Timothy's parents' house, all of us neatly dressed. It was my first time meeting Timothy's parents, and knowing their reputation made me nervous. Seeing us tense, Dad chuckled and reassured us. "Don't be so stiff. Timothy's parents are just overly concerned. Be confident." Feeling reassured by Dad's pat on our shoulders, my tension eased slightly. As the appointed time arrived, Timothy rang the doorbell. But there was no sound inside, making us wonder if they were not home. In a bit of a panic, Timothy rang the bell again, but still no response. Feeling awkward in front of Dad, Timothy excused himself and went inside first. Dad and I exchanged glances, waiting silently for Timothy to return. After a short while, Timothy reappeared at the entrance, looking flustered. Before I could ask what happened, he started making excuses with a forced smile. "Sorry, I was just delayed. Please wait a bit longer, I'll be ready soon." He quickly went back inside. Dad sighed in disbelief at this behavior, and I felt increasingly anxious. I feared this incident might derail the marriage talks. Though Dad is not quick-tempered, he dislikes dishonesty. So, I couldn't help but consider the worst-case scenario. As these thoughts crossed my mind, Timothy finally came back to the entrance. Apologizing, he invited us inside. Inside, Timothy's parents were already sitting on the sofa, but their demeanor was strange. Editham, his mother, greeted us with a sarcastic smile and arrogant attitude, while John, his father, seemed disinterested and looked away. Though we were led to the sitting room, the coffee served was lukewarm. Silent since our arrival, Timothy's behavior, and the tense atmosphere made me uneasy. However, knowing we needed to greet them, I tried to compose myself. As Timothy introduced his parents and us, I felt warmth in my heart from his considerate introduction of Dad and me. But his parents scoffed at our introduction, and the next moment, Edith's hand reached for her cup, shocking me. Factory worker father? Breaking off the engagement. As soon as she said that, Edith threw her coffee at Dad. Beside her, laughing, John made no move to stop Edith. Coffee stains quickly spread across the suit he had specially cleaned for this day. Fortunately, the coffee was lukewarm, and there was no risk of a burn. I offered Dad a handkerchief in surprise, while Timothy frantically tried to clean Dad's suit. While worrying about injuries, Timothy scolded his parents, who just kept laughing. During this, Dad said nothing, simply stood up, pointed at them, and declared, "Then I'll just have to ruin your company." He said this in a voice I had never heard before, took my hand, and we left the house. Behind us, Timothy's shouts at his parents echoed, and soon he followed us.
I'm terribly sorry. I'll make sure my parents apologize later.
No need. It's over. We're cutting ties, Dad said somberly, patting Timothy on the shoulder. Then we went back to our house with Timothy, and Dad immediately changed his clothes. Meanwhile, Timothy earnestly apologized outside Dad's room, with Dad's troubled voice occasionally heard. But I was too shocked by Edith's actions to pay much attention to anything else. From the moment I saw their faces, I knew getting along would be difficult due to their arrogant attitude. But I never expected them to do something like that, and I was furious that they belittled Dad. Sitting on the living room sofa and clenching my fists, I kept replaying the earlier events. I knew getting worked up wouldn't help, but I couldn't help myself. Eventually, Dad came into the living room after changing, followed by Timothy, who immediately apologized to me. "Penelope, I'm truly sorry. I had no idea they would do something like that, let alone belittle someone. I'm really sorry, I did a terrible thing." Timothy probably knew it wasn't something easily forgiven. The fact he didn't ask for forgiveness showed his sincerity. This made me feel like I should apologize to him. I took Timothy's hand, who was on his knees, and apologized. "I'm sorry too for saying something so thoughtless without knowing anything. I never expected it to turn out like this." Then I turned to Dad to offer my deepest apology. "Dad, I'm sorry too. My careless suggestion led to this mess." Dad just looked down and shrugged his shoulders in response to my apology. It's no wonder he didn't say anything. This situation was unexpected for everyone here. But this meant his earlier words might actually come true. I decided to ask him directly about his intentions. "Dad, what you said to them earlier, was that true? Are you really planning to ruin their company?" In response to my question, Dad looked at Timothy and then nodded firmly. "Yes, it's true. I do intend to do it. His company's performance has been poor, and I've been thinking about what to do with it. It's a good opportunity to cut it off." Dad's eyes were serious and unwavering. He is the owner of a factory, a well-known leading local company where he started as a worker. He first worked as a worker at this factory. He gave up his dream of becoming a painter after Mom passed away to raise me alone. Working tirelessly in the factory, his hard work was recognized, and he climbed the ranks. Eventually, he was favored by the previous president and promoted repeatedly. When the previous president, or rather, the former factory manager, wanted to retire, Dad was chosen to take over. The factory owns several subsidiaries, and one of them is managed by John, Timothy's father. This was revealed during the earlier greeting. John should have recognized this, but he failed to, as Edith acted first, before Timothy introduced him in detail. Timothy just wanted to say that Dad worked in the factory, which is the parent company of John's. But Edith and John's prejudice led to this unfortunate situation. If they had listened properly, this might not have happened. Dad said John's company seemed to be mismanaged. This could potentially affect Dad's factory, so he had been considering what action to take.
I was thinking of layoffs to improve management, but I'd rather avoid that if possible. It seemed like the right time to make a cut.
He smiled troubledly, probably not wanting to lay off employees. Regret tinged his words. After saying this, he turned to Timothy and said in a low voice,
"I've decided to do it, but it means your parents will be in trouble. It's harsh, but are you sure you're okay with this?"
Faced with this question, Timothy hesitated for a moment but then looked Dad in the eye and replied, "I've already cut ties with them. They did unforgivable things. They need to atone for it, and I want them to reflect on this incident and everything else. More than that, I have a request. It's inappropriate at this time, but I must ask, please let me get engaged to Penelope. I'm aware of the trouble my parents caused. More than anything, I want to be with Penelope. Please allow it." Dad crossed his arms, deep in thought. It may seem inconsiderate right after such an incident. However, moved by Timothy's fervor, I also pleaded with Dad. "I also ask you, Dad. Despite everything, I want to be with Timothy." After hearing our pleas, Dad hummed for a bit before shaking his head as if resigned.
"If both of you feel the same, then it's fine. But there's a condition. Your parents are business owners, after all. I want to know what will happen to their employees. If you can't answer that, your marriage is off."
Dad said this and sent Timothy out, not even glancing at me before returning to his room. A few days later, Timothy came with a plan regarding John's company's employees. He had promised Dad beforehand and was discussing it when I returned from work. Apparently, Timothy had listed potential new jobs for all the employees and was showing it to Dad. "So, I would like to ask, albeit presumptuously, for these employees to transfer to your company. I hope to support their employment there, contributing to the business's growth." Timothy was earnestly requesting Dad to hire them. "And I know it's selfish, but I would like to join the company too. I'll work without salary until their work stabilizes and shows results. I want to compensate for the shortcomings with my work and salary. Once that's done, I'd like to marry Penelope." Timothy seemed to blame himself for the company's downfall. He wanted to work hard as a lubricant in the situation. I was just learning now that our marriage would be delayed, but it seemed unavoidable. "Welcome back, Penelope. You heard, right? I'm sorry for deciding something so important on my own. But I couldn't be happy just myself."
"That's too much, Timothy. Dad, let me join the company too. I'll work alongside Timothy, so please accept his proposal."
As I said this, Timothy tried to stop me. But I refused to back down and desperately begged Dad. While we were doing this, Dad remained silent. But after our repeated pleas, he finally unfolded his arms and quietly nodded. Meanwhile, Timothy's parents hadn't apologized yet. Dad had been waiting these past days, but that was coming to an end.
"Time's up,"
he muttered, beginning preparations to take over John's company. Time passed, and John's company finally collapsed. Then, Timothy received a furious call from his parents, and the three of us were summoned to their house. When we arrived at their home, it was crowded with people. They were all protesting the company's collapse, shouting angrily. John probably hadn't explained anything to the employees. By calling us there, it seemed they intended to shift their own blunders onto us. As soon as they spotted us, they began pointing and accusing.
"Look there! They're the cause of everything, not me. They destroyed the company, not me. It's true. Especially that woman, she seduced our son and ingratiated herself with his father. We're the victims here. So stop making such a fuss.
As Timothy's parents ranted, trying to deflect from themselves. Although he got angry with his parents saying whatever they want, he was trying to soothe the protesting crowd.
Please wait, everyone. Yes, my father's company collapsed, but it's because of those two. And I've arranged job placements for all of you. Please hear me out.
The crowd gradually quieted down, and they began listening to us. Timothy read out each person's name, informing them of their next job. The former employees, who realized that they won't get laid off, seemed relieved. After announcing everyone's new positions, Timothy's parents started causing a scene.
Hey, Timothy. What about us? Why ignore us? Tell us our job placements. If you do, we'll forgive that man and even approve your marriage to that woman.
Ignoring their wailing, Timothy began explaining the circumstances of the company's downfall. The former employees, who realized that they won't be laid off, seemed relieved.
Which is why I'm truly sorry for the trouble. Thanks to our generous president, your jobs are saved. Please, let's start anew without anger.
Turning to Dad, Timothy gave an expression of gratitude.
We've caused so much trouble. Thank you for indulging our selfishness. I promise to work diligently.
The former employees, moved by Timothy's actions, also appreciate to Dad. Amidst this, his parents were the only ones dissenting.
Don't be fooled. That man destroyed the company, and she instigated it. Face reality. You've lost your jobs because of them, right? Just because they've helped you now doesn't mean you should lose sight of the truth.
Despite their desperate appeals, no one paid any attention to Timothy's parents. Especially after hearing the whole story from Timothy earlier. Even Dad ignored their words. As the former employees looked on, hoping for reassurance, Dad told them that he would inform them of the details later, which brought voices of relief. The employees left the house. Once everyone was gone and it became quiet, Timothy's parents started complaining about how they couldn't live anymore.
The company's collapse means we'll lose this house, which was the collateral. Yes, exactly. Where are we supposed to live now?
Timothy sighed in exasperation at his parents, who were determined to blame us. It's obviously your own fault. Maybe it's time you learned a bit of self-reflection. He rebuked them, but it seemed they had no intention of listening. Unable to bear it anymore, I finally burst out in anger.
After all the trouble you've caused Timothy, getting carried away because you were business owners. Isn't this all because you only cared about titles?
My words prompted them to retort. But Dad intervened, not letting them speak.
A business owner is responsible. Taking responsibility is part of the job. Do your last duty properly.
Receiving a stern scolding from each of us, they were left speechless. Leaving the two of them behind, we departed from there. Eventually, they lost everything, the company, the house, and the land. They didn't offer any compensation to the former employees and seemed to have dodged the issue. However, having lost everything, they ended up arrested for dine and dash. They contacted Timothy for help, but he coldly refused, having cut ties with them. They're probably in jail now. Since then, we've received no contact from them. Even if they got out, they still had to atone for their actions towards the former employees. Timothy and I quit our jobs and joined Dad's company. For the first few months, we lived off our savings and worked without a salary, as promised. One day, we met some of the employees from Timothy's parents' company. Recognizing us, they rushed over, eagerly shaking our hands, expressing gratitude for the new job, and thanking Dad for taking them in. They thanked Timothy for arranging it and thanked me for my help. I didn't remember, but I had helped them with some documents when they first joined. Grateful for everything, they left, saying they'd continue to work hard. Hearing this, we felt relieved and hurried to Dad's office. He warmly welcomed us in his office and handed us thick envelopes.
What is this?
It's your unpaid salaries. It didn't all fit in one envelope, so there are several. Dad chuckled, leaving us astonished. We hadn't been here long enough to compensate for employing many new workers. Yet, we were being given our salaries. Bewildered, we just stood there. But Dad continued, thanking us. Thanks to you, they work with enthusiasm. They always express their gratitude and worry about you. I couldn't shame myself by not paying such excellent employees. And our performance has definitely improved. Thank you. Hearing this, we embraced and cried together. We had been so focused on ourselves that we're unable to see anything else around us. But more than that, we were moved by their concern for us. Then Dad said something even more heartwarming. Timothy, I'm impressed with your leadership. If my daughter agrees, will you marry her?
Yes. Yes, of course. I promise I'll make her happy.
With a tear-streaked face, Timothy promised me and Dad. I hugged him and cried together. So, we got married. We continue to work together at Dad's company, living happily. Gradually, work has become more efficient, allowing us to have a broader view of the company, even discussing productivity with Dad. Timothy visits the factory and subsidiaries, asking about inconveniences and proposing solutions, staying very busy. We both work with more passion than at our previous jobs. Finding fulfillment really does change one's work ethic. But soon, that will have to be put on hold. I'm taking maternity leave from Dad's company. Dad, Timothy, everyone at the company, and I are all looking forward to the arrival of our grandchild.
I once messed up the life of a woman who used to be my stepdaughter. Well, it's more like it was almost her own fault. But since my revelation led to the collapse of the happy marriage she had envisioned, I guess it's not wrong to say I was the one who broke it. This former stepdaughter, Cassie, was the child of my first husband, Frederick, and his ex-wife, so essentially my stepchild. When Frederick told me about Cassie, I was honestly worried about being accepted, but we hit it off pretty quickly, having meals together and going out. As we continued our relationship, Cassie started saying how nice it would be if Evelyn, me, was her mom, and that made me really happy. I even started thinking that if things kept going well, we might be able to get married. But when the talk of marriage got serious, things didn't go as smoothly as one might think, especially since my parents weren't too thrilled. I guess you can imagine why. It was my first marriage and Frederick had been divorced before and already had a child. There was always this worry about suddenly becoming a parent to someone who wasn't biologically related. Of course, I had my own worries and anxieties, but then Frederick said, "We might have conflicts when Cassie enters her teenage years, but I promise to intervene and resolve things. I know there might be inconveniences and worries, but I'll work hard to build our family. Will you support us?" He pleaded with my parents like that, and finally, we got permission to marry. We registered our marriage around the time Cassie started middle school, but about 6 months after our marriage, Cassie's rebellious phase began. Ignoring me or rolling her eyes was just the start. She even refused to eat the meals I made. When I tried to tell her it's unhealthy not to eat during her growth period, she'd snap back. "I don't want orders from a stranger like you." Sometimes I deliberately left her alone, but she didn't like that either, accusing me of ignoring her because we weren't blood related. "What am I supposed to do then?" I'd ask, and she'd just say, "Figure it out yourself." Dismissively, it was enough to break my heart, even though I was prepared for it. But when I talked to Frederick about Cassie, all he said was, "It's a difficult time. It can't be helped." Or, She's also suffering. He wouldn't even attempt to have a direct conversation with her. Fed up, I told him, "Please, we need to work on this together." His response? "Well, the fact is you're not blood related. Maybe she senses your hesitation. Be more confident and motherly, and she'll understand. Also, I'm tired. Don't bring every little issue between you two to me." I was dumbfounded by his indifferent attitude and words and couldn't say anything after that. Though I'm not her biological mother, Frederick is her biological parent. But since I chose this marriage despite my parents' obligation, I couldn't just step down as a mother because she was rebellious and I was tired. I'm still her mother in a way, even if not by blood. So I decided to keep trying, believing that she would eventually understand. But even after 1 year, then 2, Cassie's attitude didn't change. It worsened. Not only did she continue to be rude to me, but she also started portraying me as the villain. For instance, when I asked her to throw away candy wrappers she'd left lying around all day, she told Frederick I had yelled at her for not doing it immediately. Believing her, Frederick would scold me, saying it was cruel to yell over something so trivial. There were other instances too, like when she'd leave the toilet paper roll empty and I'd ask her to refill it for the next person. She'd complain to Frederick that I'd belittled her for a simple mistake, again, making me out to be the bad guy. And these are just a few examples. There were many more, like being forced to redo the dishes because a bit of grease was left, or being ordered to clean up while suffering from menstrual pain. Just to clarify, that day she unusually offered to do the dishes, so I let her. But she just rinsed them with water without using detergent. I only reminded her that you need detergent and a sponge to get the dishes clean. The reason I told her to clean up was because she left a used sanitary napkin out in the open. I just wanted her to throw it away, thinking it would be bad if it became a habit. I explained these details to Frederick, saying Cassie's claims were wrong, but my words fell on deaf ears. Frederick totally believed Cassie. Meanwhile, Cassie stood behind him with a mocking smile. Not satisfied with just that, Cassie started crying to the parent-in-law, leading me to get scolded by them every 3 days. "Why are you being mean to our precious granddaughter?" they'd ask. At first, I kept denying it, saying it wasn't true. But parents-in-law and Frederick believed everything Cassie said, so they never listened. It felt like they just wanted to lecture me. As a result of such stressful days, I finally became so lethargic that I couldn't get out of bed, go to work, or even barely make it to the bathroom. But instead of showing concern, Cassie and the others seemed annoyed, telling me to hurry up and do the piled-up housework, calling me useless for not being able to work properly. Eventually, when I was bedridden and couldn't move, Cassie even came to me saying I was just pretending to get attention. I had no energy to respond, so I just sat there in silence. But even that seemed to annoy them. They started making loud noises on purpose as if to attack me. But Cassie is cunning. She never did any of this in front of Frederick. Moreover, she'd claimed to have been taking care of me while Frederick was at work. So he'd scold me, saying I was treating such a kind child terribly, pushing me to my breaking point. I have no idea why I'm so disliked from all sides, but whatever. It doesn't matter anyway. No one would miss me if I were gone. With these thoughts, the room I was looking at suddenly disappeared from my sight. And next thing I knew, I was standing on the rooftop of an unfamiliar building, still in my room clothes. I don't remember how or when I moved or how I got there. It was as if I had teleported, the scenery changing so abruptly. But well, it's fine. Just as I thought the height was enough and began to take a step forward, my mobile phone in my pocket suddenly started ringing. Startled, I stopped and pulled out the phone to see Mom on the caller ID. At that moment, tears I hadn't shed before started to flow like a waterfall. But I didn't want her to realize I was crying, so I answered the phone calmly. Then, "I just wanted to hear your voice after so long, Eveline. You haven't shown your face around here at all. Come visit us sometime. How have you been? Are you eating properly? I can bring you some food if you like." Hearing Mom's bright and caring voice, I couldn't hold back anymore and burst into tears on the rooftop of that unknown building, shouting, "Mom!" into the phone. Mom on the other end panicked, asking, "What? What's wrong?" But I was crying so hard, I started hyperventilating and couldn't speak properly. Then, Dad must have taken the phone from Mom, as he was now on the line, telling me to calm down and asking where I was. I managed to say I was on the rooftop of a large building, not sure where. He instructed me to stay put and keep the line open, and asked for any sign or billboard that could help them locate me. Hearing that, I just cried even more, apologizing for causing trouble. But Dad didn't blame me. Instead, he comforted me, saying not to cry so much. Gradually, I calmed down and made my way downstairs on my own, gripping the stair railing and slowly descending. I had a lot of thoughts during that descent. Like, Cassie's behavior is just harassment under the guise of being a teenager or going through a rebellious phase, or that the people around me who only blame me are just as guilty. And about how Frederick, who promised to handle everything when we got married, was now acting like it's none of his business, completely useless. As these thoughts filled my mind, anger started to bubble up. Despite feeling so hopeless before, I decided I wouldn't let them have their way anymore. Before I knew it, I had reached the bottom of the building. Looking around, I realized I was near my workplace. I wondered if I even had a place there anymore, considering I had been absent for so long, thinking maybe I should quit. As I was pondering this, my boss happened to pass by and, surprised, asked me what was going on. I could have made excuses, but standing there in my pajamas was strange enough, so I just honestly explained my situation. My boss then told me to wait in the office until my parents arrived. Remembering that the phone was still connected, I told my boss, who then took my mobile phone and informed my parents of the company's address and that they were taking care of me. When I spoke about everything that had happened in the office, "My understanding is clear now. You've really done well up to now. I don't think it's right to criticize other families, but honestly, your daughter, husband, and parents are strange. They seem to be looking down on you, using you as a punching bag. You should leave them immediately, or you'll end up in a situation like today again," my boss said with a serious expression. The other office staff nodded in agreement, saying they'd help if there was anything they could do for me. But when I said I couldn't burden them further since I'd already been off for a month, my boss raised his voice in protest. "You couldn't possibly work under such tough circumstances. Everyone here, including myself, was worried about you because you're always so diligent. There wasn't a single person who complained about being inconvenienced by your absence. You're that well respected. So have confidence. It's going to be okay," my boss said. Hearing this, I was so relieved that I burst into tears. Later, my parents came to pick me up, and after thanking my boss and the staff, I went back to my parents' house for safety. I did inform Frederick that I was going back to my parents' house, but all I got was an acknowledgement and nothing more. That night, Mom started a conversation asking what had happened. I began to tell her everything I'd endured from Cassie and the others. I broke down in tears midway, unable to speak properly, but my parents patiently listened without rushing me until I had finished talking, which took a little over an hour. After I had finished, my dad, who had been silent, said,
"We, as parents, understand the feeling of wanting to protect one's child. But what he doing is just spoiling her, pushing all the trouble onto Eveline. A parent must face their child, even if it means being disliked. Eveline has done enough. You don't have to endure anymore. We can't forgive those who pushed our precious daughter to this extent."
Hearing this, I realized anew that I was a cherished daughter to my parents and decided I didn't want to cause them any more sorrow, so I resolved to divorce. I requested a divorce through a lawyer, but Frederick didn't immediately agree, not understanding why I wanted to divorce. He seemed shocked, as if he had no idea what had happened, which surprised me even more. Eventually, the case went to mediation because Frederick kept refusing. I claimed I had been subjected to moral harassment by Frederick's family, but he outright denied it. He argued that Cassie's behavior was just a phase of teenage rebellion, and that it was actually me who was being mean to Cassie, his stepchild. However, my claim of being driven to the rooftop was recognized, and my boss, who had taken care of me at the time, helped by testifying. Frederick's arguments were dismissed. The court found Frederick at fault for not addressing the issues despite being aware of them, and I was relieved that my claims were largely accepted. After some time, I received a small amount of compensation and the divorce was finalized. When I went to the house to collect my belongings, Cassie was there, glaring at me. Ignoring her, I calmly packed my things, even as she stood behind me ranting about how pathetic I was for living alone and how sorry she felt for her dad for marrying someone like me. I ignored all that too. When I reacted nonchalantly to her kicking my suitcase, she turned red with anger. As I was finishing up and about to leave, she said, "I heard from Dad. You're slick and can't have kids, right? That means you're finished as a woman, right? So pathetic. Well, I'll tell you why Dad married you. It's because you can't have kids and you work hard to make money. Really, you're pitiful," she said, laughing vulgarly, thinking to myself how utterly lost she was as a person. Well, from your perspective, I might be finished as a woman, but honestly, I'm thankful now that I can't have children. After all, having a child like you or someone like your useless father wouldn't be pleasant. But I feel sorry for you. You have such an incompetent man as a father. That's why you couldn't get proper education and ended up so useless, right? I told her, and her face turned even redder, and she trembled with anger. Seeing her face, I didn't care anymore and just left the house. Thus, we parted ways, and 3 years passed without any contact. I was content with remaining single, but then a friend introduced me to a man who would later become my husband, Bobby. Bobby also couldn't have children, which led to his divorce from his previous wife, and he had remained single since. Our similar situations brought us closer, and we eventually started dating. One day, while tipsy, I accidentally mentioned my previous marriage. He sympathetically said how hard it must have been and started crying. His tears made me cry too. Time with kind-hearted Bobby was so comforting that it gradually melted my resolve against marriage, and we got married in our 2nd year of dating. I worried his attitude might change after marriage, But even after 3 and 5 years, Bobby remained as kind as ever. However, this peaceful life was suddenly disrupted. One day, I received a call from an unknown number, which I normally wouldn't answer, but for some reason, I did this time. The familiar voice on the other end was, "Yes, Mom?" It was Cassie. Hearing her voice made me feel sick, but I managed to ask how she got my number. She said she found it in Frederick's notebook. She wanted me to write a letter as the bride's mother for her wedding. I was about to refuse, but then a dark thought crossed my mind, and I agreed to meet her at a cafe near the station the following week. On the day, I secretly carried a voice recorder and asked her about her fiancé. I learned he was from a traditional family and many important guests from his and his family's business connections would attend the wedding. So, I asked why she wanted me and not her biological mother to write the letter. She said her grandpa forbade her from meeting her real mom. Curious, I asked for more details. "Dad said Mom was stupid and it was okay to be mean to her. When I did, something happened and she got mentally ill. Grandpa and the others took her away and that was it, so I can't meet her, even if I want to. It's impossible right from the start." She replied nonchalantly, shocking me with her attitude towards her own mother. After hearing some of her story, I asked why she harassed me back then. "Nothing special, just a way to kill time or relieve stress. Nothing more. I just didn't like the idea of a stepmother. But those times were the best, you know. Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, everyone believed everything I said and focused all their attacks on you. It was hilarious. Your face when Dad was scolding you was so ugly. Oh, and I heard later that you tried to jump. Why didn't you just do it? Would have been easier for you." She said this with such a gleeful expression that I calmly realized how far gone she was. But, well, I got the evidence I needed. More than enough, really. I was amazed at her audacity to say such things to someone she's asking to write a letter for her as the bride's mother. I agreed to read the letter, saying I'd definitely do it, and she was delighted, saying, "That's great, Mom, thank you." But I told her I'd only attend to read the bride's mother's letter and that she would make excuses for the rest, which she easily agreed to. On the day, I didn't join the bride's family's table, waiting at the back until announced for the letter. As soon as I appeared, there was a hush and whispering around. Whether it was because I suddenly appeared as the bride's mother or because of my mourning attire, I'm not sure. I didn't mind and started reading the prepared letter. "Hello, everyone. I was called here today as the bride's mother, but Cassie and I have no blood relations. We are virtually strangers. I was married to Cassie's father for a few years, but divorced. The reason was Cassie and her father, a case of grand moral harassment by them and their parents." As I read this, the murmurs in the room grew louder. I saw Cassie visibly disturbed in her seat. But I continued without care. I exposed all the verbal abuse from Cassie, Frederick's negligence. The way my former in-laws completely disregarded my side of the story and continued to berate me based on Cassie's words. I spoke of being driven to the brink of taking my own life, and how these claims were recognized in court, leading to our divorce. Then, I played the recording from the cafe, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, including Cassie's wish that I had fallen. The recording's harsh content left the hall in dead silence. I didn't come here today to celebrate. It's a payback. However, I apologize for involving all of you in my personal affairs. And to the groom, you might want to reconsider marrying this woman. After I said this, the groom, as if coming to his senses, was furiously confronting Cassie about her terrible words. Cassie was panicking and kept denying everything. But the groom's relatives started blaming her and Frederick, which looked quite comical as they scrambled in confusion. Of course, the venue descended into chaos after that, but I thought I had no further part in it and gracefully made my exit. Cassie was too caught up in the mess to follow me. Sometime later, Frederick contacted me, furiously asking what I was going to do about it. I told him I hadn't lied about anything and that it was their own fault. Apparently, the Frederick family faced a backlash from the groom's relatives after my revelation. Several important business partners of the groom's family were among the guests and started threatening to not renew contracts because of Frederick's disgraceful wife. The groom's family, in panic, tried to sever ties with Cassie and her family, but couldn't immediately due to Cassie being pregnant with the groom's child. However, they were under attack from all sides, with no one left to support them. After hearing everything, when Frederick said I should feel sorry for Cassie, I just replied, "Not at all," and hung up, blocking his number. Later, Cassie contacted me, blaming me for being ostracized by her husband's family and threatening to sue. I told her she was welcome to try, and added, "Maybe there really is a God. Everything you did to me is coming back to haunt you. That's what you call karma, you know. If things continue like this, your unborn child might treat you the way you treated me and your biological mother, who went through pain to give birth to you." When she started shouting incoherently, I quietly ended the call. After changing my phone number, I haven't had any contact with Cassie or the Fredericks since. I don't know what's become of them, but I'm sure they're not living well. Sympathy? I have none for them. They should fall as far as they can. I'll live my life happily, and they can descend into their own hell for all I care.
It's terrible. Dad has passed away. Come home immediately and help prepare for Dad's funeral. This was a phone call I received one day. There was a frantic male voice on the other end. Isn't this a wrong number? What are you joking about? I truly had no idea. For a brief moment, as I was puzzled, an unpleasant memory resurfaced. Could it be the person on the phone was my ex-husband? Realizing this, I straightened up and spoke into the phone. I really have no idea who this could be. Are you looking for my father-in-law? He passed away 3 years ago, you know. I said this to the person on the other end of the phone. What? Then I heard a pathetic voice. I couldn't help but smile. My name is Kristen, 51 years old. Surrounded by family, I live a happy life. But my journey here hasn't been easy, because I am a divorcee. That marriage was like living in hell. After graduating from college, I started working at a company as a new employee. The job was so much fun, and before I knew it, I was already 30. Most of my friends were married and blessed with children. But because of my naturally quiet personality, I was still single at 35. My fate changed when I turned 36. My ex-husband, Scott, was transferred to the branch I worked at. Scott was 38 and single at the time. Capable at work and climbing the corporate ladder, Scott seemed very dependable, and he took a liking to me. We started dating and got married. I quit my job and became a housewife. Living in the countryside, it was normal for the eldest son's wife to live with his parents unless there was a special reason. So, without exception, I started living with my in-laws. My friends who married earlier said living with in-laws was hard, but they were helpful in many ways. I believed and never doubted that life with my beloved husband and in-laws would be the same. But reality wasn't so sweet. My mother-in-law, Holly, said to me on the first day of marriage, "Kristen, now that you're married, you're a part of this family. It's only natural for you to do the household chores and to take care of us, your parents. Given your age, we'd like to see our grandchild soon." "Yes, I understand." Answer clearly and concisely. Yes. It felt like I had joined a club. But the bond between parent and child isn't built in a short time. First, I thought I'd try my best to be a part of this family, as Holly wished. Then I started waking up at 4 a.m. I prepared breakfast and lunch for my father-in-law, Mark, and Scott, and sent them off to work. After that, I cleaned up breakfast, did cleaning and laundry. I prepared lunch for Holly, and then cleaned up again. I ran errands, went shopping, and hurried back home to prepare dinner. Then, after preparing for sleep, I would always go to bed after midnight. If I cut corners, Holly would scold me. And if I did things carefully, she'd berate me, saying, "You're so slow, inefficient. How long are you going to take?" Scott and Mark just turned a blind eye to this, and I thought that was normal. In hindsight, I think I was brainwashed. Once, Holly scolded me terribly. I accidentally broke one of her plates. Her verbal abuse at that time was unspeakable. "This piece of trash! What joy do you get from doing this to me? Just disappear!" I kept apologizing, crying, as Holly screamed hysterically. But her anger didn't subside, and she raised her hand to me. Afterward, she exaggeratedly told neighbors and relatives that my son's wife broke my plate and is trying to drive me out. People who believed her looked at me coldly, and it was very painful. I just wanted them to believe it wasn't intentional. With that hope, I sought help from Scott. "But you did break it, right? It's natural for Mom to be angry. Everyone forgets about gossip soon enough. You worry too much," Scott said, not even pretending to be on my side. After learning I had consulted Scott, Holly became even colder towards me. Tattling like a child? How unpleasant. I felt I was going to mentally break down from the snide comments deliberately made within earshot. That's when Mark intervened. "Mom, don't say that. Kristen is reflecting on it." It felt like a savior had appeared to me. Holly, rebuked by Mark, clammed up. Then, snorting, she said, "I'm going shopping," and left the house. I was relieved. Then I turned to Mark. "Thank you, Mark. Scott won't help, and it's been so hard for me alone," I said, tears spilling over. "It's okay. You're not alone," Mark said, placing his hand on my shoulder. But in the next moment, he pulled me into an embrace. I panicked and struggled. But of course, I couldn't overcome a man's strength. "Please stop." "Why not? You can't have children with Scott. Maybe it'll work out with someone else. Scott is similar to me, so it's no problem." "Someone! Anyone! Help!" I screamed loudly. After a struggle, the doorbell rang by chance. Mark, realizing the situation was bad, hurriedly let go of me, and I escaped to the front door. The visitor was Trisha from next door, bringing the neighborhood newsletter. She frowned suspiciously at my face, perhaps knowing the rumor, but I was relieved she came. "Thank you," I said, taking the neighborhood newsletter. After seeing Trisha off, I left the newsletter at the door and fled the house. My heart was pounding. I might get scolded by Holly for leaving the house unattended, but I was desperate to protect myself. Since then, I made sure never to be alone with Mark. There was no way I could tell Scott or Holly about what happened. Of course, if I told my parents, they would worry terribly. They were so happy when I married Scott, worrying about my being single. I didn't want anyone to know about what had happened. I kept on edge, thinking everything would be fine as long as I was careful. In this way, I desperately lived through each day and turned 40. But to be honest, I looked much older than my age. Tired, with terrible dark circles, wrinkles, and spots. Every day, looking in the mirror made me sigh. I didn't even understand why I was here. But there was no escape. One day, Scott, who had been off from work, went out. He had been busy these past few months, so I thought it was work-related. But there was a letter on the bed. I hurriedly showed it to Holly and Mark. "Holly, Mark, It's terrible. Scott has. I showed them the letter. Holly turned pale and started blaming me. It's your fault! You're useless and can't even have kids. Scott left because of you. Holly hit me while crying. Such an unfair accusation. I just endured, defending myself. The letter had a short message. I'm divorcing my infertile wife because my younger girlfriend is pregnant. I'm leaving this house where Kristen is. That was all. Holly threw me out that very day, without even letting me put on shoes. I was locked out. I kept apologizing at the front door, shocked. Holly, I'm sorry! But they wouldn't let me back in. Then Trisha, my neighbor, hearing my voice, came out. Trisha had always been cold to me, but seeing my situation, she probably didn't think it was entirely my fault. She invited me in, lent me shoes, and even gave me money for transportation. I promised to return it and went back to my parents' house. My parents were shocked, but welcomed me kindly. When I told them everything, they were speechless, and Mom cried. I thought it was normal. I should have run away sooner. Finally free from the brainwashing, I cried like a child in front of my parents and fell asleep from exhaustion. After resting at home for a while, a few weeks later, I went with Dad to thank Trisha for lending me the transportation money and shoes. What happened? She had not asked anything before, but it must have been on her mind. Dad, speaking for me, told Trisha everything I had shared. Trisha was speechless. She might have thought it was a lie, but having seen the situation herself, she believed Dad's words. So, that was it. I believed Holly's story without doubt. I'm sorry for my behavior till now, Trisha said, tears in her eyes. Having more people on my side felt incredibly good, even though it was just a small thing. After leaving Trisha's house, Dad and I headed to my in-laws'. Just looking at the house made me shiver. Dad gently pushed my back, showing concern. I couldn't run away now. I had people on my side. How reassuring that felt. I rang the doorbell of my in-laws. Hello? The person who came out was a young woman I had never seen before. I was so taken aback by how comfortably she seemed to fit into my in-laws' house that I almost thought I had the wrong place. Dad must have felt the same, hesitating to speak. Is Scott here? Scott? Yes. Please, wait a moment, said the woman. It seemed it wasn't a mistake. Megan, who is it? I don't know, some man and woman? A voice replied, and I clenched my fists. No doubt about it. The woman must be Scott's new girlfriend. She must have moved in after I left. Who are you? Scott said, clearly disgusted upon seeing us. Scott, what's this about? Kristen is your wife, isn't she? Dad said, holding back anger. Realizing who we were, the girlfriend left with a displeased look. That woman just now, your girlfriend? She looks 20 years younger than you. Are you out of your mind? Age doesn't matter, does it? I can't be with Kristen anymore. We can't have children, and it's her fault. Just in time. I was thinking about needing to get these divorce papers signed. Scott handed me the divorce papers. Here, sign it. What kind of a way is that to talk? Dad, it's okay. I stopped Dad and signed my name on the divorce application, already half filled out at the entrance. Tears of frustration welled up, and Scott laughed at the sight. I would never forgive him. That feeling surged within me. I'll submit the divorce application. Oh, do that, he said, leaving the house with Dad. I hired a lawyer and received compensation in the divorce settlement. It was a small amount, but Holly was apparently telling the neighbors she left on her own, and now she's taking compensation money in the divorce. What a greedy woman. But I decided not to care anymore. For me, who had left, the rumors of that countryside neighborhood meant nothing. Getting the divorce settlement didn't heal my emotional wounds, but at least I was free from that house and felt at peace. 10 years later, after finally regaining peace, I received a call one day, an unregistered number. Maybe a delivery service? I picked up the phone. Hello? Then I heard a panicked man's voice. It's terrible! Dad has passed away! Come home immediately and help prepare for Dad's funeral! I was confused and replied, Isn't this a wrong number? What are you joking about? I truly had no idea. It might be a scam. As I was puzzled over it, an unpleasant memory came back. Maybe the caller was... Now his demanding tone made sense. But why should I help now? I owed them nothing. I straightened up and spoke into the phone. Who is this? If you mean my father-in-law, he passed away 3 years ago. What? As expected, a pathetic voice came through, and I smiled. So my father-in-law passed away 3 years ago. I don't know who you are, but please refrain from making such rude calls. I said that clearly. On the other end of the phone, Scott was causing a commotion. At that moment, someone silently took the mobile phone from me. Who am I speaking with? It was my current husband, Stephen. Noticing the disturbance, he took over the call from Scott. Yes, I had remarried about 7 years ago. My new husband, Stephen, is a wonderful man, 3 years younger than me. Despite my reluctance to remarry due to my divorce, I was warmly welcomed by Stephen and his parents, and now I live happily. However, my father-in-law passed away about 3 years ago. That's why Scott's call didn't make sense to me, as his death was the first thing that came to mind. Who are you? Yelled Scott from the phone. Stephen replied calmly, I am Kristen's husband. Kristen's husband? Don't lie! A woman like her getting married? Impossible. Mind your own business. Anyway, Dad has died. Tell Kristen to come back immediately. Stephen moved the phone away from his ear, shocked by Scott's yelling. I was appalled by Scott's behavior, just saying what he wanted and hanging up. Hadn't he married that young woman from before? I sighed. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Let's just ignore it. I had told Stephen everything about what Scott and my former in-laws did to me before we got married. He couldn't believe the extent of my previous marriage's horror, but he believed me, seeing how afraid I was of marriage, and accepted me. I thought I could be happy without worries, but now Scott was causing trouble again. Your ex-husband, just like you described, Stephen said with a wry smile, handing back the phone. I remained silent. I think they might contact us again. How about we show up at the funeral? Stephen suggested. What? I was shocked by his suggestion. But, indeed, if we left it like this, they might find our house and come uninvited. They were not people who understood common sense. I didn't want to meet Scott or Holly, but causing trouble for Stephen and my family was even more painful. After much thought, I decided to go and say my final goodbyes. Stephen found the funeral's location and time, and I got into the car with him. Just thinking about meeting those people made me tremble, but Stephen held my hand tightly, and I felt grateful to have married him. If anything happens, I'll help you. Let's tell them this is the last time we're involved with this house. Yes. I wasn't sure if they would accept that, but having come this far, I couldn't run away anymore. As we arrived at the funeral parlor, I said to Stephen, I'll go in alone first. Stephen stayed a little distance away, watching as I entered. Immediately, I was spotted by Scott and Holly. It was no surprise, as the mourners were sparse, and anyone entering stood out. Hey, why didn't you visit before the funeral service? I've been busy, Scott yelled as he approached me. Such terrible words after 10 years. As slow as ever. Hurry up and help. Guide the guests. Holly also commanded me in her usual way. Fists clenched, I faced the same old pair. I am no longer part of this family. I came today to say just that. What? You've become so insolent. Who do you think educated you for those 10 years? Dad is crying in this casket because of you! Their accusations brought back all those old memories. I was strong, but this was too much. Stephen must have felt it too. It was then, as he approached me, that someone shouted across the room, "Kristen? Why are you here?" It was Trisha, my former neighbor, calling out with a voice that echoed through the hall. Her words drew everyone's gaze, and I shrank. I remembered Holly spreading bad rumors about me. In this crowd, I was the unreasonable son's wife, prepared to be branded a villain and gossiped about again. I was prepared for that. But, contrary to my expectations, the response was different. Despite everything she went through, she came to say goodbye. How kind-hearted can she be? Trisha, as loud as ever, rushed over to me. Holly was visibly shocked and unsettled by her words. People around us asked, "What do you mean?" Trisha explained. "Kristen was harassed by Holly, and by Mark too. I heard screams and saw Mark attacking her from my window, so I ran over with the neighborhood newsletter." I was stunned. I had no idea she knew and had come to help. Of course, Holly and Scott didn't know either. They turned pale upon hearing this. Scott didn't even try to help Kristen. And before Megan got married, I think, Kristen was kicked out barefoot by Holly. I lent her shoes and transportation money. One by one, the wrongdoings of my in-laws and Scott were exposed. Holly and Scott were speechless because it was all true. I regret not doubting Holly's story at that time and not helping Kristen. We were all deceived by Holly. I wiped away tears involuntarily. Holly and Scott, pale-faced, neighbors looking at them coldly. Finally, the grievances of that time seemed to be cleared. "That's not true." Holly began to defend herself, but Trisha didn't allow it. "Instead of keeping quiet about the past, you hold on to Kristen still? What a shock! Release her already!" Trisha sharply scolded Holly. Holly turned red, speechless, and flustered. Trisha looked at Holly with derision, and then smiled at me. I tearfully thanked her, continually bowing. "Kristen, forget about Holly and them. Be happy from now on." Trisha said this and guided me outside, as I hadn't even lit a candle yet. "That's right. You don't need to light a candle. Let's all leave," the neighbors said as they began to leave the venue. "Wait! Please! The funeral is about to start!" Holly tried to stop everyone, but no one paused. Stephen, watching from a distance, laughed. After everything was over, I ran to him. Having him there was so reassuring. Seeing me, one of the mourners exclaimed, "Oh my, Professor!" Stephen looked up at the voice. "Wow, Olivia! What a surprise to see you here!" He seemed to know one of the mourners. Scott and Holly watched us with a glare. In the past, I couldn't have faced their gaze, but today was different. I looked back at them directly. "Oh, Olivia knows you? Kristen, who is this?" Trisha seemed to know Olivia too. She asked me. "He's my husband." Introducing Stephen, he greeted her. "Nice to meet you." Olivia told Trisha, "You know the big law firm near the station? He's the head attorney there. He helped my son with his divorce. Thanks to him, we got a hefty compensation from the divorce settlement. An unbeatable, skilled lawyer." "Oh no, it's nothing." "Wow, a lawyer! And the head of the firm. You mean like a CEO?" Stephen was overwhelmed by Olivia's words and the country auntie's strength. They excitedly patted Stephen's shoulder as they talked loudly. I couldn't help but laugh at this scene. Their words clearly reached Holly and Scott's ears. They, who usually were quick to contradict me, couldn't join our conversation. Facing a lawyer, they seemingly realized it was futile. Noticing them, Stephen turned towards Scott and Holly, bowed slightly, and spoke. "I could sue for what happened in my wife's previous marriage at any time, but Kristen wants to leave it in the past, so I won't pursue it. However, if anything happens in the future, I won't hesitate to take action. Please understand that. Scott and Holly were shaken by Stephen's words. Further, Stephen spoke loud enough for them to hear. Excuse us. It's time to pick up our child. Our child? Scott reacted to that word. Yes, I got pregnant soon after marrying Stephen. We had a daughter. It was a challenging pregnancy due to my age, but she's such a lovely child. Who was the infertile one after all? I mentioned, Didn't you marry a much younger woman? I don't see her around. Right now, she's gone home with the kids to have her third. Oh, maybe you should consider a DNA test. Scott collapsed, perhaps realizing something. Holly turned pale, too overwhelmed to respond. Shall we go? Yes. With that, I bid Holly, Scott, and Mark a final farewell and left the funeral home. Holly, now known throughout the neighborhood for her lies and harassment towards me. Every time they meet Holly, the neighbors scold her, and she has become quite subdued. Scott went to the hospital for fertility tests and was found to be nearly incapable of natural conception. Now he's embroiled in troubles with his wife. His wife had 3 children, despite being with an infertile husband. Whose children they are, only God knows. I know all this because Trisha told me. She occasionally contacts me, sharing vegetables and even used items for my daughter, treating us very kindly. She always apologizes for not being able to help me in the past, but I am immensely grateful to her for how much she has saved me. Stephen is kind, and his work is going well. I never thought I could be this happy. Even through unbearable hardships, there comes a day of reward. Now I feel like I can overcome anything that comes my way. I have learned that much from those people.